Hi, this is John from Sonic Drive Studio. I'd like to welcome you to my new YouTube channel, since this is actually the first video that I've uploaded. In the future, I'm also planning to regularly do more videos about mixing, plugins, and various other things like guitar reviews and demos, since I'm also a guitarist next to being a mixing engineer and producer. If you want to stay up to date on our videos, just hit subscribe. You can also follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/sonicdrivestudio. So I recently made a rock tune that I decided to edit down to a short section that is my new intro tune for all my videos. I've also uploaded the full version of this track on my channel so you can listen to the whole thing. Since I'm going to dissect the mix in a little bit for you, I recommend listening to the full tune at the link below. I decided to split this video up into two parts. The first part will focus on the drums mainly, and the second part will focus more on the guitars and bass. Let's go. So for this song, I'm using programmed drums rather than live drums. I'll be doing tutorials for live drums in the near future. But the drum sampler that I use is Slate drums, and I really like it a lot, and I highly recommend it. The sounds are just great. I like the workflow. I like all the additional samples you can get from the big producers like CLA, David Bendeth, and Terry Date. Also, the Blackbird samples are really good. I recommend checking them out. So for this track, I'm using deluxe samples mainly up here, and then down here I'm using 2 additional CLA samples. They just add a little bit more presence, snap, and sizzle. They make the kick and snare sound a bit more present in the mix. So that's why I like to add these to the deluxe samples. Let's see what I'm using here. I'm using the Burge Hard 22 kick. This is with the processing on, by the way. So it's not the raw sound. The Black Beauty snare. 4 DW toms, 10, 12, 14, 16 inch. Sabian Evolution Hihat, Soultone Custom 22 Ride, 2 Soultone Extreme Crashes, 1 Soultone 10-inch Splash, and a 22-inch China, which I love. And then finally the CLA samples. This is the kick. Sounds really awesome. And the OT Tama snare from the CLA set. In case you don't know what the OT samples are, they're basically over-the-top processed samples by CLA. I think he likes to blend them in with the other samples to give them a bit more balls, so to speak. They're great. And in this case, they complement the deluxe samples really well. This one sounds a bit more dry and a bit darker. This one has a bit more weight and snap to it. This one brings the brightness to the snare channel. Really makes it pop out of the mix even more. And because of the adding of these samples, the deluxe ones require less processing than they would if they were just dry without these samples added. What I'm doing basically is routing all my drums from the Slate drum sampler into Cubase. All the kicks are going to one channel. All the snares are going to another channel. The toms are going into one channel. For this set of toms, it works pretty well because they sound consistent. But if you're combining different types or different sets of toms, I would recommend sending them to different channels for individual EQ processing. The hi-hat's going to a single channel. The ride, china, and all the overhead mics are going to one channel, and the room stuff is also going to a single channel. And here we have them laid out in Cubase. And those are all heading to the drum bus here. Also got some plugins going on here. Some cool new Slate plugins as well. I'm going to play a small section of the song with all the instruments playing and all the plugins are engaged. Then I'm going to solo the drums so you can hear them by themselves with processing. Here we go. I think they sound really good. I mean, they sound alive, they sound punchy, they sound pretty mean. The snare cuts through the mix very well. Punchy. The room is sounding really big and alive. I think it's probably a good idea to let you hear these tracks without all the processing so you can hear the difference. Let me just turn these off. There we go. So the difference is pretty huge. Without processing, the kick sounds kind of muddy and dull. The snare isn't as big sounding. The room isn't as exciting. And overall, it just needs more depth, more punch, more power, and more aliveness. Let's see how I do that, how I make that happen with the plugins. If you're a mix engineer, there's a very big chance you've heard of Slate Digital. I use their plugins extensively. There isn't any mix that I do that doesn't feature them. I use the virtual mix rack with all the different modules. I use the virtual tape machines and the virtual bus compressors mostly. They're just so awesome and they've really helped my mixes. So the first one that I slap onto all my tracks is the virtual tape machines, as you can see here. I put them on all the single tracks and on the master fader. Sometimes if a session has a lot of tracks, I put it on buses to save CPU power. Also sounds good that way, but if it's possible, I like to use it on all the single tracks. I can do a quick A/B here for you. Just going to play the drum soloed. Then I'm going to turn the tape machine off and on so you can hear the difference. You can hear what it does. Here we go. I just think it sounds way more exciting with the virtual tape machines on. It sounds a bit more glued. It sounds more cohesive. The low end is fatter and more 3D. The high end seems a bit smoother as well. I really like what it does. It's great. Let's take a listen to the virtual tape machines on and off, but this time with all the other plugins running as well. Gives a good indication of what it does to the mix. This is on. And on again. Virtual tape machines. If you don't have them yet, I highly recommend them. It doesn't end there, because Slate Digital has another great product that adds some magic to the tracks. I also always put this plugin on all my tracks before I mix. It's the virtual console collection. We have the virtual channel right here. And on the mix bus, I have the virtual mix bus going on as well. This plugin emulates the sound of analog consoles. Running your tracks through analog gear, which can also be called analog summing, can give your tracks extra warmth, punch, and glue. Let's take a listen to the drums with and without the VCC plugin on so you can hear what it does. I really like the group function because it enables you to bypass all the channels at once, so you can really hear what it does to your mix. And you can also scroll through the different consoles that you have here to see which console works best for the tracks you're working with at the moment. Very cool plugin. The reason I add plugins like VTM and VCC to my tracks even before I mix is because they seem to make every instrument sit better in the mix. For instance, because the low frequencies of the kick have more depth, less EQ will be needed to hype the low end there. And it sounds really natural too. The snare will also have more body and definition to it, and the transients will be smoothed out a bit because of the saturation. Overall, it will make everything sound a bit more cohesive and more like a record, so to speak. Another plugin that adds some analog goodness to my buses are the virtual bus compressors. As you can see, it lives on my drum bus as well as the master fader. On some instances, I run audio through it without even applying gain reduction, like I'm doing here on the master bus. The gray one is just on, but it doesn't do any compression, as well as the mu. The mix knob is very handy on these, as it lets you choose the amount of coloration you desire. The FG mu tends to add some brightness around the high mid frequencies, and sometimes it's a bit too much, but you can dial it back with the mix knob, and then it becomes a bit less obvious, which is really handy. I'm just going to play the drums again, and I'm going to bypass the bus compressor on the drum bus for you so you can hear what it does. Try to also listen for the coloration that it adds, not just the gain reduction. It adds depth again and glue. Love it. I don't want to turn it off. I want to leave it on. It's awesome. I love what it does to the snare there. Cool. Now let's look at the individual drum tracks and what kind of processing I'm doing there. Sometimes I do the top-down method, which is basically mixing from the top down. So you start at the drum bus, apply some processing there before you go to the single tracks. In this case, I didn't really do that. Sometimes I even add EQ on the drum bus before I go to the single tracks. Sometimes it tends to make mixing the single tracks easier, but in this case, I didn't do it. Let's just go look at the single tracks. The effects here are bypassed at the moment. Okay, so let's check out the kick. This EQ is off. I turned everything off except for the things that we already checked. So the virtual tape machines and the virtual console collection is on. This is a pretty new plugin recently added to the Slate Digital collection. It's the virtual Preamp collection, another one of those magical little plugins. It's a bit more subtle than the virtual channel and the virtual tape machines though, but we can A/B it and listen to what it does. Yeah, really have to listen closely. I hope you're listening on good studio monitors or good headphones because it's going to be impossible to hear on your laptop speaker or something. Okay, let's listen and A/B. It just adds a little bit of life. Very subtle, but it's there, definitely. And if you add this on all your tracks, it will definitely add up and make the whole thing sound just a little bit more 3D. That's how I like to call it, more 3D. You can drive these units pretty hard as well, which is pretty fun for some types of tones, like distorted vocals or synthesizers, maybe. Um, we can see what it does on the kick. In this case, we need a pretty clean sounding kick, but it can be really cool for some dirty tones. So it's really awesome. Then I'm adding the FGN, which is a very, very cool equalizer that I use on almost all my tracks. I use it for shaping, so no surgical cutting there or surgical boosting. Just when a track needs more high end or more mids or maybe the low shelf, because it's a good low shelf as well. It's a bit more gentle than this one. I like to use this one for more aggressive cuts, but sometimes this is also very useful. We can also A/B what I'm doing here. So I'm adding about 1.6 dB on the high shelf here. 2K, I'm adding 1.4 decibels, and I'm cutting quite some low mids here. I'll play around with it so you can hear what I'm doing there, because the kick drum doesn't need a whole lot of low mids for this type of rock kick drum, in my opinion. Not boosting any lows because there's plenty of lows already. And I'm not using the low shelf in this case because I prefer to use the FGS low shelf on kick drums because it's a bit more steep. At least that's how it sounds to me. I'm going to play the kick, bypass it, and turn it on again so you can hear what it does, and then I'll fiddle around with the knobs a bit. Here we go. So that's with, without. So the high end adds a bit of that smack, which is really great for cutting through the mix. Obviously, a kick drum has a lot of low frequencies that are needed. That's what a kick drum does. It adds the bass of the drums. But this will really help make the kick drum sound more intelligible. I really like this. Same goes for this band. It adds more presence to the kick. Okay, let's check out those low mid frequencies. So if I boost them, the kick becomes really muddy. I'm not a fan. When I cut that area, the kick just becomes clearer. And you don't want these frequencies to compete with the bass guitar too much, or the low toms, or guitars with low frequencies like distortion guitars that I have going on in this track. So this is a really cool EQ for doing those types of moves. I like it. Next up, we have the FGS, which is based on an SSL. Not doing a whole lot here because this has already allowed me to do a lot of boosting that it needed. But I'm cutting even more low mids here. Let's take a listen to what I'm doing there. So I'm boosting now around the 200 hertz area, but I need to cut that just to make it sound even clearer. No low end boosting or cutting here. The high pass filter is cutting at around 37 hertz because those frequencies aren't really needed and it can take up a lot of headroom. It's going to just make your mix a bit low heavy, which you don't want. You want the balance to be good. So always be mindful of cutting the low frequencies away. But be careful though, if you cut this too far, the kick won't sound as big. So that's why I'm just leaving it here, because it leaves enough bass and a bit of sub in the kick, but it removes all the unnecessary stuff. I'm also using the new FG116 Blue Modern compressor on the kick. It's really good. If you don't know what that one is, I recommend checking the Blue Compressor launch video from Steven Slate himself. He really explains very well what these compressors do and what they're based on. This is a quite unique design. It's more of a modern hybrid that they kind of modified themselves, I guess, based on the vintage one, which we also have here. They made it a bit more clean and hi-fi sounding. The attack is a bit slower, so it lets transients through better. It works great on close mic drums. This one adds a little bit of gain reduction, and if you just listen to what it does, I think it adds a bit more punch and it brings the kick out a bit more in the mix. Let's listen to it. I just took the kick big 2 preset and tweaked that a bit. The high pass sidechain filter is really handy. It makes the compressor react less on the low frequencies. I'm using it on circuit 1 here. Yeah, it just sounds really nice. Let's check it out one more time. Bypassed. I love what it does. By the way, I might do some reviews of the plugins later. Just it's gonna take too long if I go in depth into all the plugins as much. So you can expect some reviews of the single modules later. Great. Let's check out the surgical EQ that I'm doing here. Yes. So sometimes the kick drums can have some low resonating frequencies around the 100, maybe 200 hertz area. As you saw in the mix track, I was already cutting quite a bit around here, but I also found some resonating peaks here that I wanted to cut. Just going to demonstrate what I was doing. I'm going to boost those frequencies so you can really hear them exaggerated, and then I'm going to take them back, and you'll see that it make the kick drum sound bigger and clearer. Even though we're not adding any high end or something, it's just taking away unwanted frequencies can make your instrument sound more intelligible. Let's check it out. First, I'm gonna play it without the EQ. Then with. Let me boost this for you. It just sounds really tubby there. It's not a frequency that sounds punchy to me. It's more ringy, and I don't want that in the kick, not in this case. Frequencies like that can be really great in vintage or jazzy drum sounds, but for hard rock and metal, I personally look out for stuff like that. Let's check out this other one, see what that does. It's kind of the same thing as the other one, but in another frequency area. So I hope you can hear what I'm doing there. Overall, the kick drum sounds a lot better, I think, with all the processing going on. There you have the kick drum. Okay, let's go over to the snare. Tape machines, just like the other one. Adding some warmth and depth. Just like on the kick, I'm adding some preamp here. Let's do it the same as the other one. Bypass those. Let's start off with A being this one. To me, with the preamp engaged, it just sounds like the snare is jumping out of the speaker a bit more, as opposed to being a bit more flat and a bit more to the back. It's really subtle again, but there is definitely a difference, and I prefer the sound with the preamp on. Just sounds better to me. Let's try to push the drive here again, see what it does. Sounds nice and gnarly. That's going to be great for some gnarly industrial drum sounds. Cool. So this is another one that I haven't showed you yet. It's the high lift and the low lift of the custom Snare EQ. It's really awesome. It's really simple as well. You just have a high shelf and a low shelf. And for both of these shelves, you have two options, the present and the silky one for the high lift. With the present one, I think the shelf just it starts a bit lower, so there's a bit more high mid frequencies in there, and the silky one focuses more on the bit higher frequencies. Low lift, same thing. The punchy one has a bit more low mid in there, and the big one has a bit more of the lower lows. For this, for the snare, because it's not a really low instrument like a kick drum, I think the punchy one works best, and the present one works well because you want that snare to pop out of the speakers. Let's just listen to it and A/B it so you can hear what it does, and I'll mess around with the settings. This is bypassed. Turn it on. It really adds life. It makes the snare jump out of the speaker more. It also sounds pretty good cranked. You can crank the hell out of it and still sounds great. For this particular snare drum, 3 works good, but yeah, it's a great processor, and I use it a lot for drums, snares, even distortion, guitars, whatever. It works great. Then we have the FGS again, which I use for surgical cuts mostly, and I like the high pass filter, just as with the kick. I'm putting this one a bit higher at around 100 hertz, because the snare drum usually doesn't need a lot of energy that low. The low end energy of a snare is usually around 200 hertz, so you can cut a fair amount of low end out of your snare, and it still will have body. Let's take a listen. Also removing some mid honk. I'm not really a fan of that frequency, so taking a bit of that out. So this isn't doing a whole lot, because this one is already taking care of a lot of the high end and the low end. And again, the Blue Modern is such a great compressor. It works really well on the closed mic snare. it'll be very obvious. Here we go. Let's check it out. Once again, I keep repeating myself, but the goal here is to let everything jump out of the speaker more and be more in your face. That's just what I like with loud rock music. You can hear the decay of the snare and the sustain getting prolonged, so that'll make it more audible in the mix, and it will make it sing a bit more. I like the mix knob on this one as well, because when you turn it to full, the effect can be a bit apparent, and the mix knob lets you dial it back a little bit. We can take a listen to what it does here. So that's just a bit too much. That's really awesome. Yeah, so that's it for the snare. Pretty basic. Not a whole lot of EQ. Just cutting some of that mid, boosting highs, boosting some lows. Works often, and this processor works very well. I'd say that this instance here and this compressor work really well for the snare. So let's take a look at the toms. Tape machine, of course. Preamp, of course. Virtual channel. Let's see what I'm doing. I like to boost the high end of toms in rock mixes often because it makes them stand out more. It brings out the sound of the stick hitting the skins of the toms. So there's some high end boosting going on the FGS. And I've been cutting some low mids here. Yeah, I'm just not a big fan of those frequencies in toms in dense rock mixes because, yeah, well, the word says it, dense. There's a lot of stuff happening, especially in that area. Distortion guitars like mid frequencies. And if you have toms going on with a lot of frequencies like that, they can just make everything sound a bit more messy and blurry. So we're taking some of that out. Also high passing again to not get in the way of the bass guitar and the kick too much. I'm just gonna turn this all off. Also the compressor, the revival. I'm gonna tell you what I'm doing with that in a minute. First, we're gonna take a listen to this one. That area right there. Listen closely to the low mid frequencies. Yeah, so that area is really woofy and spongy. You don't need that in this mix anyways. Boosting some highs here. Once again, to add intelligibility into the mix. Let's check out this one. Set on present as well, and punchy. Just a little bit of punch there, and some more presence. Let me just add here that you can add these things before you listen to the drums in the mix. That's always fine. I usually start that way, but it's very important to listen to these drums in the mix as well, and then go back to these plugins and see if it maybe needs less or more. Just make sure it sounds great in the mix. Of course, you can start out with it sounding good soloed. That's good, but in the end, it doesn't matter if there's very loud guitars and bass playing at the same time. So usually I'll just dial this in till it sounds good alone, and then in the mix I'll go back and see if these need more adjustment. Let's be with both EQs on and off. It's kind of dull. Yeah, I like what that does. It's great. This one is important, cutting the mud out of there. I was talking about different sets of toms and combining them earlier. When you combine different types of toms that are quite different, this won't probably work as well because the low mid frequencies that aren't pleasing won't be the same in every tom. But in this case, it works pretty well, as you can hear. I'm adding a gentle bit of compression on all the toms. Makes them just glued together a bit more. The attack is pretty slow, so that the stick attack of the stick on the skin of the toms will come through. It's just to make it all sound a bit more cohesive, all the toms together. And then finally, we're adding Revival. It's a great free module from the virtual mix rack. If you haven't heard of it, I highly recommend checking it out. It's a kind of sonic enhancer. So it's not like the Lift series. It's a bit different. It's really hard to explain. I don't really know how it works. I just know that I like the sound of it. If something sounds just a little bit too dull and it needs a bit more depth in the low end, I always try the thickness knob. We can see what it does, and I'll play around with the knobs too, so you can really hear what it does. So once again, it sounds a bit more flat, a bit more lifeless without it on. So that's why I have it on here, just to make the toms pop out of the mix a bit more. I'm just going to exaggerate this so you can hear even better what it does. That's too much. It doesn't need a whole lot of that, just a little bit. Same goes for the thickness. Yeah, that's just too much, but it sounds good though. It's a useful sound. Once again, A, B. Go. Next up is the hi-hat. Not doing a whole lot there, just boosting some highs to make it jump out of the mix a bit more. Cutting a little bit of mids and removing some unwanted lows. We can do a quick A-B. See, there's this swooshing going on in the mid frequencies. I'm taking out a little bit. I don't need that in the mix. Anyway, pretty basic because the hi-hat sounds pretty good by itself. Let's take a look at the overheads. So yeah, there's not a whole lot of EQ going on because the high end is already really nice in here. I'm not adding anything, not really subtracting anything. I'm adding a little bit of a shelf here because I don't need the sub frequencies. I want more control in the single kick mic. If you add the low end in the overheads, it can be really nice, especially with more mellow types of music. In this case, I want to have more control of the low end in the single close mic kick mic. That's why I cut this off. The compressor is just here to smooth things out a little bit. I think I took a overhead preset and tweaked it a little bit. So that's pretty basic stuff. So the compression just adds a little bit of life, a little bit of glue to it, which I really like. Okay, so now let's take a look at the room mics. First, I'd like to show you what I've got going on here in the sampler. So since I'm using 2 different libraries, they both have different room types. The CLA one has an FX slider, which is basically a digital reverb on the kick and the snare. CLA one also has a room A and a room B. They do sound a bit different. B sounds a bit more lo-fi than A. And the Deluxe series also has a room, as you can see here. We're just going to listen to them soloed so you can hear how they sound. So that one's going to take care of a bit of extra depth. Then let's check out the Deluxe room. Sounds pretty cool too. Then room A from the CLA pack. So the CLA ones are obviously gonna only have the kick and the snare in there, because those are the only samples from the CLA pack that I'm using at the moment. Okay, let's check out room B. So that one sounds a bit more lo-fi. I like to combine them all into one fader and then edit them from there, because it works very well. Okay, let's take a look at what I did there, plugin wise. Of course, the virtual tape machines again. Then I'm also using the FG73 preamp. You can really push this one on the room mics. It really smashes them, which sounds great. You don't have to be very careful with room mics and rock music as far as distortion is concerned. So yeah, you can bring this up a little and kind of break the transients. We can check out what the difference is when I bypass that one. Makes it sound a bit more glued together and a bit more thrashy. I like it. On the FGN, I'm not doing a whole lot. I'm mostly just cutting out everything under about 100 hertz because I don't need the lows in there. Just like with the overheads, I'm just leaving the low end to the close mic kick to have more control over that and to keep it punchy. So I'm taking everything out below there. Let's take a listen in AB. So it's just thinning out the bottom there a little, and there's a little bit of saturation going on there on the FGN. It's opening things up a little. Then with the FGS, I'm just taking off about 4 dBs of high end at around 10K, because you don't want those frequencies to compete with the overhead mics too much, because we're going to compress the room mics with this compressor here, and it makes them quite aggressive. So that's why I'm taking this out, or things can get a bit too harsh. So that's going to take care of a bit of the harshness inside of the mix. And finally, here is the Blue Edition Vintage compressor based on an 1176 Blue Stripe. Really, really great, and it's awesome on room mics, as you'll hear in a second. I have it set on circuit 2, and I have the high pass sidechain filter on. It keeps the lows a bit more intact. Attack is really fast on this one, so it's really crushing the room mics. I have the mix set to about 50% to keep the transients a bit more intact as well. Let's take a listen NAB. This one's great. that just gave the room mic so much more energy. It's just sounding awesome. Okay, that's it for the room mics. Let's go to the drum bus. See what I'm doing there. The modern blue again, which is working great on the drum bus. I'm having it set to parallel. I think I also tweaked this from a preset. The Slate Digital presets are pretty good, so I recommend trying them out before you try your own settings. May help. Turn this off and let's take a listen. I really like what that does. It just adds more life, more glue once again. It makes the room come to life a bit more. It makes the transients jump out of the speakers more. So the kick and the snare just jump out more. It's really awesome. I was using the black one before this, but the blue modern has replaced the black one in the drum bus for me in parallel. It's not even mixed that high. It's just 27%, but it's doing a whole lot. And I really like it. Awesome. We haven't done this plugin yet. This is Bomber. This was made by Slate Digital as well, and it's a processor that tries to bring everything out of the speaker a bit more, even more. And it works. It's crazy. I might do a review of this one as well later. I'm just going to show you what it does to the mix, to the drum mix. So again, it's pretty subtle. I have the intensity dialed back to only 9%. It's basically a mix knob. I can let you hear how it sounds when I push it up. It sounds pretty crazy and over the top. But if you use it in a very subtle way, it can add some really great punch and definition to your tracks. Works great on the drum bus, works great on vocals, works great on guitars. If you feel like a track just needs to jump out of the speaker a bit more, I recommend trying this one, definitely. And then finally, the FG Gray, which we already checked out. Quick ID. So the processes on the mix bus are doing quite some cool things to the mix bus. Yeah, if you haven't tried things like that before, highly recommend doing that. That's it for now. I'm gonna do another video on the guitars and the bass soon. I hope you enjoyed this. I couldn't go into specifics too much. I just wanted to show you the mix and give you some tips, some all-around tips on making your rock mixes better, and in this case the drums. I hope it gave you some insight. If you have any questions, just leave a comment below, and in the future I'll try to be more specific about certain things, certain plugins. Okay, see you in the next video. Thanks.